Let's talk about those October movies. And welcome Cinema, where we focus on a film. I'm Josh, this is Simply Cinema. I watched 16 movies last month based in October 2024. Let me know down in the comments below how many you watched, how you rank them from your least favorite to your favorite. Make sure to like this video if you enjoy it, subscribe if you haven't already to join in the film culture community where we talk about the love of cinema as a whole. Let me know your favorite month of movies thus far this year, and we can talk in the joyous community that we're building here on this channel. But going in last place, we have Salem Slot. Now this one wasn't awful, but it certainly didn't live up to my expectations that brought about of the original, and it has certain quirks here and there that builds up some higher action, some higher things it's doing with its vampires, and the director certainly brings out some great cinematography throughout the thing, and what we get out of Bill Camp, other roles that are balanced in here and there, do have and serve their own purpose for what you're getting out of the plot. But this is a film that went straight to streaming, and it was taking these 2 3-hour miniseries and diminishing out 1 hour of the cut. What you're getting out of the film just feels lesser because of all the different aspects that are taken out of the story that diminishes some of the aspects of the character building, the story building, and while there are certain things here and there that elevate it a little bit more than some of the experience in the other ones, it ultimately feels like it's an empty, lesser version because you're taking an hour out of the cut. And while it is something where you may normally like to watch a quicker movie, in this particular case, the extra hour really aids on and pads the story in a nicer manner to what you're getting out of the story as a whole. And at number 15, we have Hellboy The Crooked Man. Now this one went straight to VOD, and maybe for good purpose. While it does have its good elevations to the story, I'm not familiar with the comics to know references of how it's connected, how it's not. But it just isn't necessarily the exciting character that I get to attach to. While there is some good action pieces here and there, there's some good quirks, what it's doing with witchcraft, taking this elevated scenery for putting it into the woods that has a consistent tone all the way through. That does elevate some of the moments, some of the cinematography, certain things where it's headed with its story, though it never really particularly grabs onto my attention what they're doing with the story. Certain characters that I don't necessarily remember having watched it just a few weeks ago. And so while you're getting some certain things where the makeup work to Hellboy looks good, certain aspects of the story are compelling, it's not necessarily one that becomes memorable by the nature of having just watched it a few weeks ago and kind of forgetting about it all the same. Which leaves me into next place. We have House of Spoils, the last and final Blumhouse movie of the year. Now this is a mix of Hocus Pocus and The Bear. What we're getting out of Adrienne Demo's performance is great. She really does bring out some compelling things. Certain works with what they're doing with the shots, making the food, the wood setting, taking that into the woods once again, takes it into some compelling features, what it's doing with its culture, what it's doing with its background story, its development to add in some finer details, to look at the garden, give it a sense of character work, and going about different ways where it's chefing up some good gourmet meals. But there's certain things where it doesn't take it further than that. It doesn't explore the culture much more than the garden, or dissect certain things with the witchcraft, what it's doing to its story. Some of those details are left a little bit too late in the story to where I sort of was at a standpoint where I did like certain aspects of the story, but the moments didn't make up for the whole grand scale of what you're getting out of the movie as a whole. Next up, we have Lonely Planet, a Netflix film that's a romance drama that we take Laura Dern and Liam Hemsworth. We could get some controversy from what you're getting out of that cast because it's an older woman with a younger man, what you're getting out of that whole chemistry, and pulling in this other romance that's going on between Liam Hemsworth, having his character be in a relationship already already that she's just having trouble with. They go into this writers' conference, this writers' retreat that I'm personally a fan of because as a writer, I'm just pulled into that sort of atmosphere. Laura Dern being the writer herself, there are certain things that pulls on the heartstrings of me as a writer, what they're doing with the script and the things that go about along the way. I'm also a romance film fan. What we're getting out of this, there's things that go about along the way. It goes about familiar tropes that doesn't elevate the story to be one of the best ones. It may be a one-time watch that I don't necessarily go back to, but it is something that hits on some of the right emotions here and there, going about some things that ends on a nice note. Maybe it could have added a little bit more to the story, but for something that's based on a book, for me that enjoys what we're getting out of the romance, the chemistry between Laura Dern and Liam Hemsworth is pretty stable and relatively good for the nature of the time that's given for building upon their relationship. And they could do a little bit more to the writing aspect, adding in certain scenes where they elevate the experience a little bit more. But for a romance drama, it is a solid one out there, and one that did win my heart over at least a little bit, even though it is following along relatively familiar tropes. And at number 12, we have Brothers, an Amazon Prime Video exclusive that I did relatively enjoy just the same. I'm not typically into rambunctious comedies, but being able to understand what it's going into, this is from the director of Palm Springs, which to that regard, this is relatively disappointing what you could have gotten with the script. Something that was a little bit more wise or clever within its wits. What we get out of Palm Springs was really great as a directorial debut, and this one, you know, it had its moments. Josh Brolin, Peter Dinklage, they have a brotherhood that really hits home on the themes here and there, manages to bring in some other cast members that do win home the balance of what all is going on. Brendan Fraser is one of my favorite characters. What they do out of him, how they bring out some quirky lines. I Am Justice is something that brought out a moment that was hilarious, and also adding this big ape that just goes into the things along the way. I get what it's going for, and that's what brought out a few laughs out of me, even though I don't always relate or attach myself to these sort of comedies. Again, this may not be one I go onto that often, but it is a streaming movie that did win me over for the nature of what it was trying to tackle into. There were moments that turned me off, of pieces of the script that could have been a little bit well put together, that really sustained the nature of what it was doing with its story. But overall, it was a solid one for the month that it was bringing into. And at number 11, we have Smile 2. Now, this was relatively on the level of what we got from the first. It manages to take what it does as a horror sequel and build upon the own nature of what you're getting off the first, going a little bit more extreme, a little bit harder, following along the lines of what we're doing, taking what we ended off with Smile, and going about its own arc where it goes a little bit more wild. There's twists and turns that keep you guessing, and while some of the secrets may be controversial in the way that it hides the twist from the audience to where you can't relatively see the hints coming about, it still builds upon that mystery in a nice way, in a fun way that can be fashionable, can be bloody, and a way that it really manages to tackle its characters, tackle its subject. It goes about some not necessarily horrifying moments, not necessarily totally grotesque, but manages to really tackle upon its subject, upon the things, and manage to build it upon the lore just a little bit more to get you more interested into the plot. It's not a horror movie that is really grand. It's something that really manages to tackle in on its genre, but it is delivering on a good, well put together story that may have caveats here and there, what it can do better, but it sells itself and leads you into open-ended cliffhanger that could make Smile 3 hit that much harder. And at number 10, we go into Terrifier 3. Now, I'm not a particular fan of the Terrifier franchise. Like I mentioned, some things where if you take a movie, go nonsensical with it, don't build upon the characters at all, then Terrifier 1 and 2 are not my cup of tea. This one has a couple moments in here that don't fully work for me, but with the placement I have for it, I do really enjoy what we got out of this one that much more, making it my favorite of the franchise. How we tackle in all the nature of the film as a whole, making it more bloody, more gory, but also being able to add a little bit more to the lore, even if there's not full explanations that I want to be full on explained. There's sometimes moments where you just don't need all the explanations to the plot, how things actually work as a whole, because sometimes you just need to enjoy the grotesque nature of what all is going about. But because you're building upon the main characters, the humans, to the plot, that's what really balances in, makes you care at least that much more for those characters and the threat that's going on, the risk that is going on with Art the Clown and his trusty little sidekick girl that is all going about in this creepy little nature, where Damien Leone is just great as a director. What we get from the actor that plays Art the Clown is just creepy as ever, and so just how they manages to tie that all together ties it into a festive good time that could be put on the rewatch list now and then for each Christmas that's coming up. And so just how that all puts itself together was a surprise for sure for me, not necessarily liking the other two Terrifier movies, and just being able to have a good time, a blast at the theaters, for how grotesque and hard R it went with its blood effects, with its gore, and its practical effects are as strong as ever. Next up, we have We Live in Time, and this is an A24 film that seemed like it would be one that's way up my alley. And while it did have some disappointments, things that could have worked a lot better for the romance drama that it is, an A24 film starring Florence Pugh and Andrew Garfield, some of my favorite actor and actress for their own nature. What you get out of this love story, the chemistry definitely effectively works. It's a story that's told out of order and goes about these different shenanigans, something that's down to earth, drama filled, and very simple for the nature of what you're looking at with the story out of whole. And that's where some aspects of the story are familiar for what you're getting out of romance, and being an A24 film, I feel that's some of the idea and the choice behind why they decided to make it out of sequence. While it definitely does hit on some heavy emotional moments here and there, it does take a turn on what it's doing with its out of order sequence, and that's where sometimes, because it's out of order, it shifts your expectations here and there from knowing when the story will effectively end. And so when you're on this emotional moment and then suddenly go back in time or go forward in time, it just shifts your focus on where the story is centered. It definitely can effectively and has effectively worked for some people, and I still see it as a good film, knowing what it's doing. But for the effective emotional tone that it's taken all throughout the story, it can take a turn on where I'm following the script, what it's doing with the baker's competition, certain things with before the marriage, after the marriage, with the baby, without the baby. And while it is easy to follow along to the nature of what it's going on with, it's easy to follow clues, what's going on, the different haircuts, no haircut, what you're going in with the point of the context is never lost when you're following the script. But because it still shifts from point A to point B to point A and point D, it goes about all these different shenanigans that, while it can be an effective romance drama that has a unique style, that style just doesn't always work for the whole nature of the story. And at number 8, we have Superman the documentary. Now, I am not a huge attached fan to the original Superman franchise, but what we get out of Christopher Reeve, I'm trying to explore more documentaries, and this one was educational and well edited to the nature of what they're putting into this project. It's mostly taking place with the sequence of the horse accident and everything that's following after, as well as himself, Christopher Reeve, as an actor from the 80s up until the horse accident. And while this is edited out of order, just like We Live in 10, it's much more effective with what it's doing with its editing, not making it feel ever too boring for following along the sequence and then chronologically, because you're learning new details here and there, what you're learning out of the narrative that it is his life, and it becomes effective by the pieces of information provided, going into deep archival footage to be able to pull this film off in a way that is really emotional to the beats that it's going about, being able to learn about his life that I wasn't really familiar with, his horse accident, or even some parts of his archival ideas, his filmography that I haven't explored quite as much outside of the Superman movies, his early films that got onto, his opinions on the later Superman movies that he wasn't all into. And so that's where it was just a fine time that wasn't necessarily something that really is soaked in the emotions, but being able to watch this real human story got me a little bit more into the mood for documentaries that much more. Which leads me into next place. We got Joker Folie à Deux. Now this one, yes, I'm a fan of what they're doing with it. It definitely is unique, it's out there, but the cinematography, the twist on the story, it's rambunctious, and certain things didn't necessarily feel like it had a plan to be made as an epilogue to the first Joker movie. It doesn't feel like a sequel, but that doesn't mean it doesn't have its moments, working effectively as a musical, where we get Lady Gaga and as Harley Quinn and Joaquin Phoenix as the Joker, and their roles are respectively really good for the nature of what all this story is asking. It's not a story that necessarily really wins everyone over, as there has been many disputes of what is all being pulled off effectively. It's definitely a film that was being made because they're trying to win over the same fans that made the first film earn over $1 billion. But for me personally, what they do with the film, the last part of the film, that was definitely a daring move for the nature of the story. I do enjoy bold choices like that when they're used for a purpose, and while there isn't necessarily the most consequential role for where this Joker role is taken into any sequels, any other part of a DC universe, it is a film that does its service first job. The musical aspects, the cinematography, all works wonderful in a way that does work and win me over by the end. Next up, we have Piece by Piece, a brickumentary that is very interesting and compelling, based on Pharrell Williams' life, which I wasn't familiar of him as an artist. I have heard some of his songs before, but as I'm not as in tune with the music culture, learning the music stars or everything that's going about the song titles or other things, this was very informative to the nature of what I sort of needed to get more in tune with the music genre, what all is going on, and that sort of world that's all going about in the nerd culture. And so just what we get out of Pharrell Williams' documentary, it was very colorful, very vibrant to the nature of what it was pulling off with the Lego brick and making it animated. And that was really effective, a smart choice that was explained within the documentary itself, and it pulled off some rather conventional natures to what a documentary can do, but because it put it in the Lego brick and animated it, it was very lively and fun and added some entertainment to the nature of what we're getting out of this documentary. And just being able to learn about Pharrell Williams, while we're getting a little bit of a bias based on what we're being on Pharrell Williams, him speaking and everything, getting some interviews and other music artists that really pull in some nature and some ideas that gone on within his life. Just the craft that was put into this documentary, to being able to animate some scenes that you may not have archival footage of, it just made it that much more effective by its own means, and creative by utilizing the brick, because I went into this film mostly because I'm a Lego movie fan, or a Lego fan in general, and so diving into this, being a film fan, of course I wanted to explore more documentaries as well, and so just that sort of combination of the two things, it added some extra flair to the nature of what you're getting out of this, and it was very fun, lively, being able to listen to his music for the first time, as well as being able to finally connect some of his more popular music, such as Happy, to the artist, adding a name to that, and being able to educate me in a way that is informative while also being entertaining. Getting into the top 5, we have Exhibiting Forgiveness, which was a limited small release that I was able to watch in theaters, and I highly enjoyed, being one of my type of drama films that really balanced in all the natures of being sensitive to the topic, going about this estranged father story, while also balancing in this artist that's trying to make it big, trying to get it out there and earn his own way, while also having this girlfriend, certain troubles that are going on within that relationship, while also his mother is trying to connect him with his estranged father that has been in prison, and there's different complications that have gone on in his past. It's sensitive to the subject, it's not fully predictable to the nature of where it is always going, especially by the end, what you're getting with the outcome of that relationship. As you're sort of tying in some different complications, you need time to heal all the scars that are going on with the trauma, the father being this really strict, really old school sort of do all your work for yourselves, don't let any pain stop you along the way, and so there's some really difficult and heavy hitting things that are going about. It's not too over dramatized, but it's not too under dramatized to where it can be a sensitive topic for some people, the way it dives into some things and the complications this one guy is working out with his girlfriend that is similar in parallel to his father, which makes sense for the nature of what you're going on in life. And so how to utilize also the art, his artwork within the film, how it parallels the nature of what is all going on in his pathway to healing, is something that really brings out some magical feeling to the themes, to the ideas, that is all working into making this film that much more beautiful and its own art piece to the nature of what all filmography and cinematography is working into making this a better film. And number 4, we have Woman in an Hour. This is a Netflix film that came from the directorial debut of Anna Kendrick, and the cinematography, how it all is pulled off, is just really wonderful. The nature of all the potency to the themes about sexual abuse, about this serial killer that's sort of going on, that was based on a true story that I was not familiar with by any means, and how that takes this 70s game show and showing this one serial killer that was once on there after this year-long spree of things that he took over some women, raped them, and then it killed them off. And so how that all is going on, it's a tough subject matter, but it's still sensitive with this woman's perspective. It doesn't show too much, even though it's not necessarily blindsiding you to what all it is inferring to the outcome of some of these girls, but also this one girl that is also going on, how it all ended, the multiple year spree that this one guy was going on. It definitely brings out some creepy vibes. It's sort of told out of order because of certain other girls that are going on with that were victims to this situation, and then also the main storyline is about that 70s game show, there definitely could have been a little bit more flavor to the nature of what it was doing with that, but still the cinematography was great. How it manages to tackle in its editing, pull upon its own narrative and storyline, while also being informative of the nature of what all went on in the past, makes this one to be a better film of the year for what all it is combining to its potency to the story and thematic elements that really pulls it all together. And at number 3 we have Conclave. Now this is a really well put together drama by Edward Berger from the director of All Quiet on the Western Front from 2020-22, and that was one of my favorite films from that year. And this one, it is really well strung, really well put together. It's not necessarily one that's up there for me, way up there at the top in my top 10, but it definitely does deserve a higher spot on the 2024 list just for the nature of what you're getting out of the cinematography, the colors, the mutedness of the background being all this gray, the Palestine chapel that's recreated for this film, and utilizing the colors such as black, white, and red for the robes, for the clothing of these people. It's all about this Catholic Church that the Pope dies with conspiracies that are all going about away, and you're learning more conspiracies, certain things that goes about trying to find a new hope. And while there's trouble with the candidates figuring out some past secrets that are going on upon their lives and some troubles of what that means if they become a pope, you're sort of dealing with the lesser evil of the few people that are going about. And it's not a good film necessarily for religious people to fully embrace, because it wouldn't be a good thing to have this voting system where all of these bad things are going about without getting a new pope. And once the new pope is elected, which I won't spoil how it all comes about, it still brings about some troubles that just reveal some conspiracies and certain things that really brings about a different outcome, but a surprising film by the nature of what all it entails. Ralph Fiennes, John Lithgow, Stanley Tucci all bring out some fantastic performances, and there's some other side performances that work just as effectively in bringing this film to life. And of course, still the colors, the cinematography work effectively to the nature of the themes, the staleness to the nature of everything that's going on, the bleakness to the church as they're struggling to come afloat, deal with the conspiracies, and manages to find a new pope by the end, because of all the things, all the troubles that are all coming about along the way, that makes things just extra complicated and elevated all the same because of that trouble. Coming in at number 2, we have Caddo Lake. Now this is one I didn't get to cover in full on this channel, but I highly enjoyed for the nature of what it was all playing off, with its twists and turns that go about near the end, and it has a slow, suspenseful, mysterious start that kind of gets you questioning certain things that are going about along the way. And for me personally, I would say go into it as blind as possible. I'm not going to be talking too much about specific details, but what we get out of Dylan O'Brien, his cast for this film, is just really great. I feel like we should get more films from him that definitely go along the same vibes, the adventure sense of what we've got in the past, from what we've seen in Maze Runner, the trilogy, or even Love and Monsters. For this one, he had a great performance, and there's certain things where at about 15 minutes in, I was surprisingly be able to guess about one of the biggest plot twists of the film that went later on in the film. It does take you in for a surprise, certain things. I was just really just generally excited that I was able to guess one of the major factors, but there's key elements here and there talking about this, like certain parts of its history, pieces of a puzzle that you may have to figure about along the way, but ultimately it reveals all for you, and the twists just work effectively. Some people are turned off about how much twists come about near the end, but I still feel it effectively manages to tell its story, go about its twist in a way that works effectively for the nature of what all it is working on as a whole. But that leaves at number 1 for October of 2024, Good Witch. This one has been looked over. It had a limited release starring Michael Keaton, and it is a film very much up my alley. Just a drama, this overworking father that is kind of estranged from his kids as well as his wife, that the film just starts off with his wife leaving him in order to go to rehab, things he didn't know about her, things he doesn't necessarily fully know about his kids, but it's almost a Mr. Mom sort of vibe that I haven't watched yet, but that's the comparisons that I've heard made for this film. And just going about, it's less comedic, but it does have those soft comedic elements, the drama that isn't too heavy, but still manages to balance the perfect comedy, the perfect drama that really hits all the right beats for me personally. It doesn't win over the hearts for everyone that I've heard of, but the way they go about this, Michael Keaton's performance just hits heavy. It's one of my favorite performances of the year. There's a couple other things where his older daughter from his first marriage just gives on a great performance as well, and that breakdown moment near the end before she goes about with having her baby, and then also having 2 9-year-olds that he has to raise while his wife is gone. Just the way that all handles the subject matter is just really potent and rich with its themes. The way it dives into this character development, Michael Keaton just having a great turmoil, midlife crisis sort of deal with having to deal with his overworking natural state and learning to develop a way that gets him connected to his kids, gets him in learning things that he had as mistakes in his past, and then reconnecting a little bit with his past wife and his current wife that you don't see until near the end of the film. And so just how it naturally manages to craft its themes with these fantastic performances not only makes it one of my favorite and my favorite of October 2024, but one of my favorites of the whole year that we've gotten thus far. So that's just my ranking of all the films I saw in October 2024, all 16 of them. Let me know down in comments below how many films have you seen last month related to October, and make sure to like this video if you enjoyed, subscribe if you haven't already to join in the film culture community where we talk about a lot of cinema as a whole. So that's just all, and make sure to do yourself a favor and go watch a movie.